Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with Professor Francisco Veloso, the Dean of the Imperial College Business School and the personality in the arts of science, technology and business, an expert in entrepreneurship and a PhD in technology management and policy from the MIT and a master in technology management and an undergraduate degree in physics engineering both from the University of Lisbon. Francisco's research has been touching both entrepreneurship and business challenges and has been in some ways working in a global scale with the areas of education, technology, business and entrepreneurship, which are areas very important for our times, and it's a big honor to be here with you. I think we could talk about a lot of the papers you've been doing, a lot of the work as well that you did position Católica as one of the leading business schools in the world, which is kind of an achievement in itself, bearing in mind that Portugal is not a premium country in terms of education, but as well your work between Europe, US, and as well the balance between business, technology, and all the challenges that we face nowadays. So I'll go straight away to the questions, and the first one is, could you tell us about your education, early career? How did you arrive here at this time?
Sure. Thank you very much first for the invitation to contribute in these topics. Of course, as you mentioned, I mean, the topics that you're interested in are very close to my heart. So it's a pleasure to be able to share some of my views. I mean, I studied physics engineering at the University of Lisbon in Technical in particular, mostly because I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, and so I was a good student, interested in technology. And that felt like a very interesting balance between strong foundations, but also a little bit of an applied nature. And I very much enjoyed that degree. Really, I felt prepared me with the right toolkits and allowed me to explore a little bit the world academically to try to then think about what I wanted to do next. And it was through the program and through my undergraduate that I got interested in entrepreneurship. I was the president of this junior enterprise in Technical, where we did a lot of focuses on entrepreneurship, and that was kind of like a little bit of the spark, together with a couple of other things, into my interest in this area, which I started to pursue then academically. I did a master's, as you mentioned, in that same space. And then when I finished that master's, which was kind of my entry into the social sciences, coming from the more engineering and sciences background, I decided that I wanted to pursue a PhD and be an academic in this space, and basically head off to the US to do this very interesting program that MIT had between engineering and the social sciences to look at these issues of innovation and entrepreneurship, and that's kind of been the launch pad for my career in education. Has been the combination of these various elements.
So can you, on that context of Lisbon, US, and of course from Technical to MIT is a big jump, and then you come back and then you establish Católica Business School, which is a big international success. Can you tell us a bit of that bridge? First of all, different cultural approaches towards education, and as well then coming back to a country that has no experience in business schools and suddenly positioning worldwide. Can you tell us a bit about that, because that in itself is quite an achievement?
So, I mean, after I finished my PhD at MIT, I stayed for an additional 10 years in the US. I mean, I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, kind of like went, and did my career through that, as a researcher, as a teacher, heading research programs, projects, PhD students, doing what's normal for an early career academic. And at Carnegie Mellon, I was very involved already with innovation and entrepreneurship as part of my academic interests, and had gotten progressively more involved in leadership in academia. I was heading a PhD program at Carnegie Mellon, and then we started a big collaboration between Portugal and Carnegie Mellon, the Carnegie Mellon Portugal program, and I was one of the directors of that program. And that allowed me to get a little bit more exposure back into what was happening in Portugal in general in academia, and specifically with Católica. I already knew some of the people there. I had been teaching, kind of like summers, and even spent 1 year there before, so I kind of knew the institution. But after the beginning of the Carnegie Mellon Portugal program, that tie became much more intense. I started to spend some time at Católica, and basically I realized that the school was on a fantastic development trajectory, and so hopefully I contributed to the development of the school and to the international affirmation of the school, but that effort actually came way before me, and so the previous directors had started very much to shift Católica from just being a domestic player to have an international outlook, building on the opportunities that came with the Bologna reform and the growth of the pre-experienced masters. The school had started to internationalize. It already had international programs, international faculty. And so when I arrived, I think I helped to consolidate some of that effort and some of that initiative, and to hopefully push it forward in a few directions. And so it was a trajectory that started before. And when I arrived, I felt that there were very nice conditions already laid out by my predecessors and the team for me and my team to continue to push forward. And that's what we did, and that has been an important evolution for the school that has continued after me with subsequent directors, and it's very nice to see. What I did bring to Católica, precisely because of my own experience and interests, was a more significant involvement in the areas of innovation and entrepreneurship, and make it more central to the life of the school. And I think that came at a very interesting moment, because when I started as the Dean of Católica, it was 2012, it was still in the dovetail of the big financial economic crisis that Portugal, but also internationally, we had gone through. And that had made the students much more aware about entrepreneurship. And so I think until the late early decade of the 2000s, I think there was still a lot of emphasis on taking a job at a well-established companies. I think the financial and economic crisis all throughout, but especially in Portugal, where a lot of the established firms wobbled, and some of them were sold, some of them went under. I think it cast a lot of doubt on the young students that were very well prepared, very lofty aspirations for their lives, about looking at a range of opportunities, and especially the entrepreneurial opportunity started to become much proeminent. And so I think there was that combination was very interesting, and it was a lot of fun, and I think very rewarding to be involved into the early kind of like internationalization, not only of Católica, but also also the entrepreneurial ecosystem around Portugal that was happening at that time, with the emergence of several firms that are now actually unicorns or very visible, and being a little bit involved in some of that of the early stages of that.
So before we go to your role here on the Imperial College Business School, so one thing that I think is quite unique is your experience in Europe, then of course in US, and of course in major Premier League universities and college, and then coming back again to first Portugal and then to UK. How do you see the difference between the two sides of the Atlantic, and as well this way that the US normally has a much more prominent relationship with the entrepreneur world, and as well with the business world, whereas in Europe we have much more an academic separation, which is slightly changing, but it is. So can you tell us a bit the perception, and how do you, that being 10 years in the US, it's quite a big time, and that experience?
So, as you said, I mean, especially in institutions like MIT and Carnegie Mellon, there is a very important engagement element. So these are institutions that are at the forefront of technology and science, but also very much engaged with the practical elements of trying to bring that science, that technology, to benefit the world and to have impact on the world. And so I certainly benefited a lot from being in that environment and understanding not only that it's possible, but how important it is to push that. And then, so when I returned back to Portugal, I feel that, and even back here to the UK, I feel that some of the elements are already there as well. And so one of the interesting things about the evolution, in particular of business schools, is that when you decide to open up and internationalize, you really very much have to open and take that much more pragmatic and an engagement attitude. And so one of the things that really I felt very attractive at Católica when the opportunity came for me to become the dean was that it was already on that journey. And when you compared with what was happening in most of the system around Europe and even in Portugal, Católica was at the forefront of a much more engaged and much more interactive environment. Not only what happens inside the school in terms of the way that we work with the students, the type of approaches towards education that I knew well from the US, even the internationalization. I mean, very quickly, at Católica, we moved to have a third of the faculty not being from Portugal and being international. So it quickly became a very international environment. So certainly with a variety of hurdles to overcome, especially at that time with some of the economic difficulties that Portugal was going through, but also with an extraordinary opportunity precisely because of the fact that we were among the first set of schools and universities that were very much embracing an international and much more modern approach towards education and an approach towards the way that we work with business all around, but also in the areas of entrepreneurship, for example. So in some senses, there are many elements that at the forefront schools in Europe, you were not so different from what I had experienced in the US, but of course at a different magnitude, different level of sophistication, different level of resources that these leading institutions in the US have. So in some ways, I felt that in Portugal we had to do a lot with much less resources, which is in many ways very entrepreneurial. And if you care for entrepreneurship, that actually ends up being quite a lot of fun. When we interview entrepreneurs and we ask them, why did you decide to do it? Why did you stay in company X? Because a lot of them have had previous experiences in very good institutions. They say because I feel that we can make a difference by embarking on something that certainly did not have the resources and the development of an established institution, but could approach and move in that direction. And that's very much what I felt at Católica in many ways, but also here, because the business school here at Imperial College is a very young institution. Compared in many ways, it dates from the late 80s, but until around 2000, it was only basically one school of the Faculty of Engineering. It was only since around 2000 that really became independent as a faculty. So in academic terms, it's also quite young as well, and therefore there's a lot of an entrepreneurial dimension of developing the business school, and I personally appreciate that very much, and that's something that in some senses people when they've been going from established companies and they go and establish and they start a company. In some senses, I went from established institutions and moved into more entrepreneurial, younger institutions that are still building themselves, which is different, but also very, very interesting and very rewarding.
Yeah, it's an excellent experience as well. So precisely on that topic, so we are in a very disruptive moment, and I'll go that in the next question, but at the moment, so business education is very sensitive because it first of all, even me as an entrepreneur and as an academic and as an influencer, I feel the disruption of hiring people that come from a business school or people that have no experience in a business school. And one of the things I get very sensitive, even me teaching business schools, is precisely what is the value that comes out of someone that comes to a business school and does an MBA or does an executive education. So how do you see this shift? Because it's a bit tricky right now, especially, and I will just use this example. So if you look at the world economy, we have around 450 to 500 million SMEs and startups, but probably 10% of the world economy is 10% of these companies, or even 1%. But then the real jobs are created by the other 400 million to far, and even for instance, UK alone, there's 6 million SMEs and startups. So how do you see these levers between the big players and then the medium, small ones, which are the ones that create value and create jobs? And as well, how can you teach? And because one thing is teaching someone that comes from a big university or a big company. The other thing is someone that is an entrepreneur that is trying to do the best he can to survive and to create a business.
I think there are different elements into that are all important. So certainly, I think that the entrepreneurial element that you talk about, can be important for both established and young firms, and for large and for small ones. But I do think it is quite important to consider that. Now, the way that we think about preparing these people is certainly to give them the right toolkits. And so, one very important part of the students that we have is what we call pre-experienced master students. So these are students that have done a first degree. A lot of them actually not in business and economics, perhaps in engineering or perhaps even in law, but a lot of them in the business school here at the Imperial College, they tend to be more on technical backgrounds. And what happens to them is that they've studied, for example, mechanical engineering, but they have decided that they want to go into a business environment, be it a startup or an established business, and they would like to deepen their skill sets in that space. So there is a very baseline, role that is just equipping them with understanding the fundamentals of businesses. That is true for all business schools at all level, which is very valuable. But that's kind of what I would say, the minimum, just provide them with the right skills so that they can read the balance sheet, so that they understand strategy, they understand marketing, they understand the fundamentals of operation, so that then when they enter a business, whatever nature of that business, they can, be a functional, productive, employee that is really helping to drive value. But I think that if we would only think like that, especially at a place like Imperial College, I think we would not be doing our role. The way that I tell the students when they arrive here is to say that, when they come here and when they are thinking about their lives, they can think of them as being on the passenger seat and just well equipped to understand kind of where the car is going, right? And understanding the direction of travel, whether or not you're trying to arrive to the right place, and you can even provide some hints to the driver or help the driver to get to the right seat, to the right place. But a very different attitude is if you take yourself to be on the driving seat of that change and really help to shape that change. And that's really what we try to build on when we think about, a student and therefore then later on a graduate from Imperial College Business School, is somebody not only that has the fundamental, elements of what it's required to operate in a business environment, but be this agent of change and realizing that there are many things happening on the world out there, and then feeling the responsibility to drive that change and to drive that change for good. And we'll talk about that, in a second for sure, given what you just lead. But that attitude is quite important. So that means that, for example, when we expose them to the entrepreneurial space here, that could be make them participate in entrepreneurship competitions, classes where they have to pitch or they have to think about business plans, but also make them reflect on what it is to launch a new business, all of these elements. You really is to make them first better appreciate that they can be an agent of change, but also, provide them with a level of comfort for them to risk, right? So we can provide a safe ground here for them to start to take chances while they're still in academic, to think about new ideas, think about their roles, to proactively think about what's the future that they want, so that then when they graduate, they can be those agents of change, whether through a startup or to an established firm, right? And I think that's true for both, because both are under very important transition. Take the financial services industry. It's under massive change, The Lloyds Bank is investing $3 billion in digital transformation. You know, the number of startups in the area of fintech is just like mushrooms in a moisty environment all over the place. You can see, you know, JP Morgan hires more people from tech backgrounds than with finance backgrounds nowadays. You know, all of these are signs of how much things are changing. And so I want to think that we try to equip our graduates to be at the forefront of driving this change, and that they be equipped, whether they do that in an established firm or in a young startup, and that they can drive value, you know, in both ways.
So picking on that, and actually today's particular, yesterday, Professor Clayton Christensen passed away, and being the father of the disruptive innovation, or at least that we call it now. I would just put it in. It was not planned on my interview, but I decided to make being in innovation as well. So one of the things when you look at the disruption is precisely all the areas that we're talking, how we adapt to society and the times we are in, but as well our business model applies to technology and the models that are related with the market, product, and so forth. So we are in a time of precisely very sensitive geopolitics. If you look at Harari, for instance, in his books and 20 Lessons for the 20th Century, in one end we have the best time in history of mankind, but in the other end we have the perception of very hardcore geopolitics and a lot of fake news, manipulation of technology, kind of the doom scenario of Matrix and things like that. So how do you look at this specifically, bearing in mind that just 2 years ago we had Brexit, so we had as well everything happening in the United States, and as well now with China. How do you see that, and how do you look at the leaders that you take out of the university? Because if you look at, for instance, fake news, which is a big thing, it was created by academics, directly or indirectly, of course manipulated by very high-profile people in finance. But how do you look at this part? And you mentioned social impact, but as well there's a component of business, technology, and ethics. Mm-hmm. How do you look at this when you try to mold and manage to create new business leaders?
Well, I think, you know, this is quite important. There's two bits to that. I mean, we talked a little bit about that element of taking responsibility, taking charge, right? Now, what you're alluding to, and it's quite important, is that, you know, that take charge maybe to go in the wrong direction, right? I mean, you can take charge and not quite do the
or get results,
the things that you should.
Yes.
So one of the things that we try to do is precisely to make sure that some of those elements are quite present here. So I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of that. So one of them is a very important emphasis on sustainability, and making sure that our people understand, for example, you know, the sustainable development goals and how important they are for today's society. And that starts with the way we think about research, but also then the kinds of things we do with our students. So for example, you know, we have a first-rate finance department, and we have, in the business school, and then at Imperial, we have, amazing climate scientists that are really at the forefront of pushing that. Now, we then create something like a Center in Climate Change and Finance to really try to understand how do we deploy the $2 or $3 trillion that you need from the financial markets to really drive climate change in a significant way, which is absolutely necessary if you want to attain the Paris Agreement's objectives in a couple of decades, and have that present on the research side, but then start to be present on the way that we think about and the way that we do things with our students, right? And besides that, that's one example in the area of climate and finance, but more broadly, we have another center looking at sustainability, where we're looking at the CSR reports that all the companies have produced, and trying to understand which of the activities and efforts really relate to better responses to stakeholders, at the same time as we are still, of course, providing value for the shareholders, and trying to bring that to the way that we educate the students. So this is one of the ways that you as a business school, by, for example, making it very clear that sustainability and sustainable development is very part of your ethos and your goals, that you can try to infer that concerns into the students, to make sure that they're very well equipped to reflect on and to understand that you need to be pushing change, driving that entrepreneurial elements, but do it in a way that's a force for good. A third example of that could be, for example, put initiatives in the area of social goods, so that when you're thinking about entrepreneurship, is not entrepreneurship only, in the more traditional sense where, you're trying to make a lot of money with whatever product, but things that relate to the environment, things that relate, for example, with the promotion of women entrepreneurship in a more diverse entrepreneurial environment, or promotion of entrepreneurship in places like Africa, for example, all of which we have here, but also then, for example, trying to use and drive technology for social good purposes. So we have an initiative called Data Science for Social Good, together with Carnegie Mellon and other places, that is helping to drive that. So all of these, it's very important that you make it as part of the experience that the students have, be it in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom, so that they first become aware. Second, that they feel that they have the understanding, so that they gain an appreciation for these issues. And third, that they can apply that, so that when they're those agents of change, they are those agents for change, in a change that is for good.
So picking on that and going more into the nitty-gritty, because I think a lot of the challenges that I find from my experience dealing with education and as well in the business world is there's a big divide. And of course, for instance, one of the things we've been seeing, especially in the UK and what happened in the US as well, is that there's a kind of a questioning of the professionals, the academics and a lot of things. So we have a kind of a paradox. We have like kind of a, not going to politics, but there's a perception of not respecting the academics and the research, which is a paradox. And then we have a lot of research driven, that is the world economy that is driven by that. And then of course we have geopolitics. But then on the middle of this we have the disruption of the tech revolution, which is, I have a more direct question. So how do you see the angles of this? Because I think this is kind of, for me, the balance that is the difficulty as the point of view of education, because everyone deals with technology 24/7, but then use it for good, or at least for managing things right, it's the challenge. So how do you go from the theory to the practice? Like you mentioned 3 examples on sustainability, but then on this, let's say on the entrepreneur side, how do you work on that?
So I think that there's different issues, because some of this is moving quite fast, and we have to do quite a bit. So I think at the business school we're worried with that at different levels. We're worried with that at the phenomenon level. So as you're saying, these things are happening. What can we do? And I think that there's a lot that we can do actually, and that we can contribute much more. Take for example things like fake news or other things. When you relate that back to the point that you were making about why people don't trust or do not trust, a lot of it is because it's hard for people to understand what to trust, because they're becoming overwhelmed with information. So we went from a world of scarce information and very few ways of accessing that information. For a while people were worried that people could not have access to information. The problem now, I think, is overload of information and how to cope with that. And I think there's much more that we have to do as academics, as academic institutions, that can and should be contributing to that. And I'll give you one example. That if you think about, for example, all the issues about, for example, cookies, or the way that you understand all those safeguards on the websites, one of the ways that things have been evolving is to try to find easier ways to convey that information, so that people can understand, what is important or not important, and have, clear guideposts, so that people, have better ways to kind of assess that information, the quality of that information, and what you can derive from that. So there's a research component to that I think is quite important, and that we're very vested into making a contribution in that space, which is to also deploy technology and social sciences knowledge to try to better address that information and to provide mechanisms for people to better cope. I think we've been looking at some of those issues as kind of either a social problem, or that we have to equip the people to deal with that, and we do, but at the same time we also have to do more on the research and the technology side to better provide information to people than we are doing at the time. And so think of it, if you, for example, when you're reading something on Facebook, or if you're reading something on whatever website, you could have some kind of way to assess whether that information is, out of a trustworthy source, and you could be defined a certain way, and that could come with a kind of a green logo, let's put it this way, saying this source is trustworthy, or you have no idea what that source is, So we need coping mechanisms and things that we have to do much more. And when we think about, for example, the work we do on digital transformation, and this is a very important area for the business school, we're doing all sorts of things from very technical to very social. This is one area that we definitely want to be contributing much more, right? So when you bring that to education, I think you have to realize that training and education the students, you have to, in some senses make them better equipped technically, but also better equipped analytically and in critical thinking. And that's the important, difficult balance. When we think about digital transformation disruptions, as you said, people often think, oh, you need to code, you need to program, you need to data, you need analytics. And that's true, that I think even students that are coming out of business needs to be much better equipped to deal with all those technical kits. But what we're also investing a lot of time and effort on is how do you develop leadership capabilities in this new environment? How do you develop critical thinking? How do you develop your ability to work with others, to gather information, to manage information, to do a variety of things that are also novel and that are absolutely critical for the leaders of today? And in fact, my perspective is that the students and the graduates actually go into those leadership positions much quicker than before. I think a few years ago, if you would go and enter this established firm that everything was kind of like structured for you, you could be 2-3 years perhaps inside an organization without having to have a major leadership role. Today, because of the much more distributed nature of work and gigs and all of these, even if you go as a young recent graduate, you may have to deal with some things that are being done by a freelancer externally. We have to basically manage some kind of network. So your ability to have to deal with that is much more acute and actually from a much younger age. And this is something that we're taking very seriously at the business school and very much trying to instill those capabilities into our students.
Yeah, that is a critical element. So this touches on all the areas of the fourth industrial revolution, and as well probably the biggest shift in the history of mankind in a lot of ways. So how do you, and going a bit with the drama that comes out of this, how do you look, and if you could touch most of the things, is, for instance, we mentioned fintech, but of course artificial intelligence is much bigger. Well, that's everything, and you cannot just put it. And of course we have still blockchain in the sense of data, identity of data, and as well creating encryption around this, and of course all the things that come out of, for instance, digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and all the different things. So how do you see this fourth industrial revolution? Because I think we are only touching the surface, and we see already the issues that are coming with kind of this topic functionality that we're touching, but as well we are in the inception. So this is going to be much more accelerated, and something, if you look at the fourth industrial revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, it took 100 years. Now probably will take 10 to 20 to make a revolution that probably bigger in the history of mankind. So how do you look at this from an education and as well from a practical perspective?
So building on the notes that I just, the issues that I just raised earlier on, I mean, that is why, for example, I said that when I try to train my students, I try to train the students making sure that they have the capabilities to be entrepreneurial in the sense of trying to drive change, whether it's an established firm or a new startup. Because precisely, as we were saying, things are changing so much and so rapidly that they may start as a startup, and that startup may grow and become a large company, or it may go bankrupt and then they get hired by an established large corporation. Then they'll come out again. Maybe they'll do a spin-off. So I think they'll be in and out because the structure of today's economy is changing very rapidly. And so they will be in transition mode themselves, the young professionals, and so our current students. They will be in this transitory mode themselves because the industry is changing. And that is the important element, is for them to be able to navigate and help drive that change. That's why I was mentioning that to be so important, because I think the nature of the change is so large, and we need to equip them to be able to manage, first to certainly navigate that, but more important to navigate at least the students that come from a leading institution such as ours to be driving that change. Now, we don't know where that's going, right? And so we need to create the capability for the students once they graduate to keep on learning and keep adapting and keep on searching for where is both the opportunity and where is the threats that they need to face and to move forward with. But they also need to be very demanding with their employees, with their employers, demanding with themselves, demanding with the people around us about what we need to do to get to a better world. Because as you were saying, I think these important changes that are happening can have both huge potential, or also a variety of drawbacks. I mean, I think if we went back 5 years, we would not have anticipated how quickly and how profound all these threats to democracy and fake news and information and mistrust would emerge, right? I mean, at that time, if I remember 6-7 years ago, people were mostly talking about just trusting the website. Should we trust this website or not trusting this website? And what are the tools that we can put in place to trust that website? Now it's no longer about that. It's should I trust what I'm seeing in front of me, regardless, because I don't know. Facebook is certainly an established player that, if it's something that is on a Facebook platform, it's probably not going to, the likelihood it's not going to be malware or something like that. But it can be a different kind of malware, right? Malware, intellectual malware.
That's a good point.
And we don't know how to distinguish that. And so these students and graduates need to be able to navigate that in a very assertive way. And that's really something that is quite important for us to press on, and for them to be that demanding with everybody around them, so that things are being pushed in the right direction, and that the technologies and the opportunities that arise are really trying to make a difference. Certainly one of the most significant ways is in terms of making a more sustainable world. I mean, if we think about the threats to the environment and to climate that exist nowadays, I mean, we are going to have for sure technology that can address that, but we need not only to develop it, but we also need to put it in place and to adopt it. And we need to have that responsibility of pushing that forward. And this is one of the things that I think is quite important to do. The other one is to make sure that we cope with this socially and that we find a way to adjust, because one of the things that we also need to be very aware is that these disruptions are going to affect people in very different ways. And some people, and hopefully those that are coming through Imperial College, are going to be very well equipped to deal with that. But many others are not going to be. And it's our common responsibility to find ways to advance business and society in a way that is also able to respond to the needs of those that may be less well equipped to handle these changes. And so this is also quite important for people to pay attention to.
No, very, very interesting, and there's a lot of things we could go. So I think we've been going already almost for half an hour. So I'll try just a couple of wrap-up questions. So one is a very practical one. So for instance, if you look at the moment, for instance, last year we are in 2020, in 2019, one of the biggest skills that was demanded for business people was blockchain technology, and probably the second is AI and all the areas of digital transformation. So are you doing specific areas on these areas of segments of technology, or are you seeing more in a holistic way in terms of the way you position?
Both. I mean, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, today's business students, when they finish up, they need to be better equipped to handle data, analytics, as you said, understanding AI, blockchain. They need to understand that. And so part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that that is all present, so that, regardless of the degree that they're doing, of course, if they're doing a degree in business analytics, they will be learning they will be, taking courses that prepare them in machine learning specifically. Yeah. But even if you're doing a general master's in management, for example, I want them to understand this phenomenon and what's out there and what they need to do. So that means for us to both make sure that regardless of the degree that the students are pursuing, that they get exposure and a basic understanding of what's happening out there and how these technologies is changing business and society in important ways. But also, we're also then developing specific programs that take that to a different level of depth. And so, for example, we have a master's in fintech, which is of course preparing the students to be much more active and proactive and better equipped to be basically working in that space. And so we're also investing on that education. So fintech is the more obvious one, but also business analytics is one where they really dig deeper in some of these tools. So that's combining both the general awareness for all the programs, MBA, Masters in Management, and then the specific programs where we go much deeper on that. And then, of course, being in Imperial College, we're very much intellectually led. And so the way we do that is also by having a variety of initiatives on the research and intellectual leadership. And again, both horizontally and in terms of depth. So what I mean about this is we have a center in the area of fintech where we're working with partners like Citibank, for example, and exploring how these technologies and digitalization is permeating into industries and what we can do to deal with that. Anything from automatic trading and entrepreneurship in the area of finance. So we're doing a lot of that. In our area of analytics, we have people that are doing a lot of that, specifically, for example, trying to understand how the dynamics of work is changing because of machine learning, how it's affecting jobs, how the landscape of jobs is going to evolve over time. And so we are doing very specific research at the forefront and at the intersection of business and technology. And this is very much present at the heart of what Imperial College Business School is. Of course, that's absolutely true at the area of entrepreneurship. I mean, we're creating one of the largest ecosystems within the university of entrepreneurship in the world because of the new White City campus, which is an entire campus devoted to innovation and entrepreneurship. We have there the invention rooms where anybody from Imperial can play with a mechanical lab, a 3D printing lab, a bio lab, an electronics lab. We have 8,000 square meters already of incubation and innovation space. And this year we're going to open another 20,000 of scale up. So we're going to have a huge ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship right there. And so entrepreneurship is very much at the heart, both from an education point of view, but also from the point of view of experimenting with that. But then, very importantly, it goes back to the point you made earlier, we're also concerned with that and looking at that on elements that percolate across established concerns. So what do I mean by this? For example, we have faculty working in things like how is machine learning applied to insurance, creating biases, and what we can do around that. So we have a paper by one of our faculty getting a lot of attention about the kinds of biases that automated decision making in insurance can create and how to deal with that. So this is examples of both understanding in depth on entrepreneurship, practicing that, learning about machine learning. It's kind of a repetition there, and so the in-depth degrees. But then looking at issues such as the dynamics and the change of work or the ethic elements that are very much percolating across all areas and that we very much need to do research on to make sure that then that research is fed into the students so that their learning experience is very much at the frontier of what this transformation is inducing and requiring from students and society.
Very interesting, and if we could go for more, so just two more questions to wrap up. So one of the questions, it is a very practical one. So most of the big business schools, including Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Berkeley, MIT, are starting, in the previous interview I saw you talk about MOOCs. They kind of went out of fashion, but now there's this kind of like online MBAs, or actually not just online, but just online executive programs. For instance, for blockchain, AI, fintech, there's a huge competition. So are you trying to go in that direction, or you're more focused on the campus and on the network ecosystem?
No. We're also, in fact, I would say that we're very much at the forefront of digital education as well. So we started about 5-6 years ago to make a very significant investment in digital education. We started first try internally some of the courses that we offer to our students here at Imperial to start to do them digitally, to try to learn through that. That went very well. Then with that, we moved, and we were among the first to offer online MBA. And so we have a global online MBA where they only have to do 2 weeks here on campus, so one at the beginning and one towards the end, and everything else is done digitally, and that has been a huge success. You know, in fact, on the QS rankings, we're number 2nd on the world, and I think it's going to take 1 or 2 more years to be on the FT rankings, because there's this window of X amount of years you have to have before you can rank. But so we'll rank very soon. I don't know. I think probably next year. I think, and we're expecting to do quite well. So that's what we did. But because precisely our investment in digital education is very profound, we didn't want to stop on the MBA. So then we moved, and we also started to offer business analytics online last year. And this year we're starting in the fall strategic marketing online. And these are all degree programs. So after this experience, we feel that pretty much we can offer whatever we want digitally in terms of the degree space. And so we're trying many different things. So we're trying, for example, what can we collaborate with other schools internationally to offer programs that are flexible and involve multiple institutions. So we're very much pushing the frontier on that and trying a variety of different approaches. And also, you know, we're now very much entering on the executive education space as well. And so over the next few months, we will have actually a variety of programs that are going to start to appear digitally. Initially, our focus had been on the degree programs, because we really want to make sure that we did a good job, and that's where we're also more established. You know, executive education, because we're a relatively young school, is also a very a younger initiative, and so. But now we're pushing that quite significantly. And so I would say that half of the growth in the next few years will come out of digital education. I would say in a very meaningful way.
Very good. So one of probably the last question, because we've been almost for 1 hour. So what policies, actions would you like to see implemented by business education institutions on a global scale to deal? I'm talking on a general level, because you mentioned, I think you went very clear and very inspirational areas, but on the global scale, because I think the challenge we have is the global scale to tackle a lot of these issues, but as well to create solutions, because I think, and that's probably my last provocation, is in the sense of, I think with all these technologies, or we use it right or they're using us, and I think at the moment, I think we are more at the point of being used by the technology than actually using it for good in a lot of ways. So how do you see that from an education as an expert, and as well a PhD researcher on these areas, and as well an academic?
So one thing that we're doing quite a lot here, and I think that's a huge opportunity for many universities, many business schools around the world, is this idea of, to the extent that the business school has a technical element as part of the university, just like we have here, you know, Faculty of Medicine, Natural Sciences and Engineering at Imperial, is to work more interdisciplinary to tackle these issues together with the more technical side. And I think that's an amazing opportunity. Certainly for us, for the business school here, the connection with technology and to do that with the rest of the faculties here at Imperial is very much at the heart of what we do. Because if we want to tackle these issues seriously, I think it is important to be close to the technology, and that can be provided by the faculties of engineering, natural sciences, depending on the area, or medicine. So I think this opportunity that we've been pushing here, which is to be closer to these faculties, to try to better understand, you know, what the solutions are. I think that is very valuable, and so I think that for many business schools that historically have been further away from the rest of the university, an opportunity to connect more. And that is true on the technical side, but it's also true on the social sciences side. So things like philosophy and law are also ever more important, you know, for these current challenges, because these challenges are not just about the technical part of it, but also about the social and the human elements. And so I think one part that I think is very valuable is for the business schools to connect more and more deeply with the rest of the universities to try to identify solutions and opportunities to make sure that these technologies and these solutions are used for good, and that we can iterate around problems and solutions, you know, in a quicker way. So that's certainly something that I think is quite quite important. We found it very rewarding to work in a more close way with the rest of the university in tackling some of these issues, and I think many others will benefit. And that connects in particular, for example, to sustainability. If we want to really, I think, have a role for the business schools, I think we need to be realizing that, these different attitudes towards business and having a much more responsible way of understanding the role of business in society needs to be the way that we teach our students. And so I think that needs to be very much part of the ethos of the business schools and very much at the heart of that. I think many good business schools have understood that and are already on that trajectory and have made that. We need to continue to push that, and more importantly, as you said, as you alluded to, I think to try to push solutions, right? So that's why the examples that I gave you on the climate change and finance is about trying to find solutions. The same thing on entrepreneurship is about trying to find solutions through new companies to tackle some of the big issues of today, or using data for social good is another good example of the kinds of things that we can do. So I really think that the business schools are ever so more fundamental, and the reason being because one thinks that even if you have a good technical solution, making sure that that technical solution is adopted and disseminated is a very difficult thing. And you have to often now, with these types of changes, to change business model, change approach, change structure. And the business schools can really contribute to be very, very much at the heart of it. So I think that in these big problems that society faces today, if the business schools really adapt to put these concerns at the heart of what they do, they can be, really, really strong forces for good and really helping to address some of these issues in very meaningful ways. The latest example is that we applied for a center a few months ago. We're still hearing whether we're going to get it or not, in the area of new business models for zero pollution economies. It's a very interesting idea, regardless of what happens with that center, because if you have new technologies that can tackle a zero net pollution approach, but it's very clear that for those to be successful, you need to put them in place in a different way than the current ones are working, because they will rely on clearly different business models. This is an excellent example of how you take what we can do better at the business school, which is not the technical part, but thinking about business models, thinking about organization, thinking about deployment, thinking about costs and revenues, all of that, and then connecting that back to a technical solution and to something that can make a difference, which is something also that we cannot provide. And that's really, I think that, and also on the social side and on the health side, are amazing needs to which the business schools and their graduates can really be an immense force for good.
Well, thank you so much. I think we could go, there's a lot of questions and ideas, but it's been almost 1 hour, so it's a big pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.
And we'll follow up, and I hope our audience can get all of this inspiration and wisdom as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.